Then, to kick us off for our EPSG general meeting, just as a reminder, apologies if you've heard this now twice, but just as some general housekeeping, if folks wouldn't mind keeping yourself muted unless you're speaking. It's always great to see folks' faces in these conversations. If you can leave your camera on if possible, to rename yourself with your name and your organization. And then really, we greatly appreciate everyone's active participation, but also monitoring airtime to the extent possible. Then today we just wrapped our 249 stakeholder meeting, and so on the topic list for today's EPSG general meeting includes and kind of diving a little bit deeper into topics that are on the agenda for the September SBEC meeting, talking a little bit about the effective preparation framework and continuing approval review process next steps. And then greatly appreciate the feedback that this group has provided to staff over the course of the last few months around the functioning of this stakeholder group. And so we had a really great opportunity to discuss this with the SBEC at their July work session. And so want to circle back to y'all with some next steps and considerations for feedback and some requests from this group around some post-work input that will help inform the continuous improvement of our engagement. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Marilyn.
Jess, would you possibly be my partner in screen? Yes, I love it. Y'all, when the associate commissioner will drive the deck, I don't run into any side hurdles here, so I appreciate that. We're going to hit the high points of many of the, as Jess said, items. There will be a couple of the items that are coming up on the agenda that will either be on the consent portion, or since there were no significant changes, we're going to skip over those for now and get into the meat of the conversation. But this gives you, for a few minutes, items on consent, adoption. I have a couple of things for proposal and the disciplinary cases. And then on the very next slide, a high-level overview of the discussion items. Again, we're going to have staff who have the opportunity to delve into some of these that we think are of most interest to this group, and look forward to those opportunities. And I am first up, I believe, on the next
Marilyn,
slide. Yes.
one thing I realized I failed to name as I was introducing this section too, just so that folks are aware, we are planning on holding a 2-day meeting in September. The board approved for September and the December meetings for this calendar year, 2-day meetings. And so we do anticipate starting the meeting at 1 o'clock on September 19th, and then moving through the agenda through September 20th. So just so that folks, if you normally hold that Friday time sacred for SBEC meeting, tuning in, we'll also be kicking things off on Thursday afternoon. And now I'll turn it back to Marilyn.
You are the best, and this is why you are the associate commissioner, and I appreciate that very, very much. Colleagues, I'm excited to be the first one that has an opportunity to talk about updates on the Chapter 228 proposal item. On the next slide, you're going to quickly see, I wanted to celebrate the milestones and the roads that we've traveled and the work that so many of you have joined us in doing to get Chapter 228 up to the point where it is. But I would be remiss if I didn't kind of hit the high points of how we are back today with an opportunity to make some additional improvements to that rule text in some specific areas that you folks raised for consideration by the board and the TEA staff. So this timeline, very quickly, in February and April 2024, you all heard SBEC reinforce a commitment to come back at the earliest opportunity to make some additional adjustments to the 228 rule text, centered around the feedback we received specifically on the clinical teaching sections, the observations, and then the implementation date. You all were beyond gracious to give of your time and talents at the June EPSG meeting, and Marilyn asked you to do some work before July 4th. So you got to celebrate your independence after you finished that mini feedback survey for us. Super grateful for that conversation. We had an opportunity to have a discussion item in July where I gave the board the disclaimer that we went to print before we received the benefit of some stakeholder feedback, had an opportunity then in August 9th, to come back to this group and give you some time to also talk with your colleagues out in the field to help us continue to make those improvements on the 228 rule text. And so we're here today, and I do believe I remembered to send you all the proposal rule text a little bit earlier this week so you could lay eyes on the results of a significant amount of work, collaboration, and your ongoing commitment to keep lines of communication open with us. We're grateful beyond measure for where we've ended up and hope that you as well are pleased with the end results. We will be presenting that rule text to the board at the September meeting for their review and support with moving that along in the rulemaking process. I have just a couple of slides coming up. So on this next one, I wanted to come back, and I know you've seen the rule text yourself already, but to re-anchor us in the conversations about the why for some of these changes. In the 228.2 definitions section, in response to feedback around consideration of extracurricular activities and professional development being able to hopefully be counted towards clinical teaching, we thought it was important to anchor and add a conversation around extracurricular activities. So that was the rationale for adding that into the rule text. The rationale for the Legacy 228 rules definition will help complement, if you will, the reference to the legacy rules in 228.6 implementation date, and further clarify for the field the use of those rules for candidates who were admitted and working pre-9/1/2024 versus the new rules in 9/1/2024 and beyond. And then lastly, we had an opportunity to visit with you all. You gave excellent feedback on the survey about the definition of school day and the conflict or potential conflicts and confusion with the clinical teaching rules. So you'll see here on the screen and in the rule text that we'd shared and talked about before now as well, the striking of that information about clinical experiences and the ability to then allow the clarifications and the rules for that to exist in its own portion of the rules, 228.67. Jess, if you will indulge me and then move us along to the next slide. So 228.6 implementation date is the first set of rule text. I have this up on the screen with a highlight for one reason, and I want to first also give a quick spoiler alert here that we got a great question about this rule text from one of our esteemed members of this group. And so I saved that question and will address it at the end of my part of this spiel, because I think it'll be helpful for all folks who may have similar questions to benefit from that. But quickly on this particular slide in the rule text, our efforts here were to be responsive to questions around the implementation date as previously presented not being 100% clear in the rules, to also try to do some things that would further bring to life and address some of the concerns that were raised around candidates who were already in the work of becoming a teacher with programs before September 1 of 2024, and making sure there was a very clear distinction about your new candidates entering programs on 9/1/2024 and later. Your eyes on the screen right here in particular, I want to make sure I also highlight that one subsection A and B. And then the question, I'll talk about A in just a few minutes in more detail, but subsection B, big B, which is not the right way to refer to it, but it will catch your eye on the screen here, and the highlight. That rule text before it previously said we wanted folks to complete all requirements under Legacy Chapter 228 rules by August 31 of 2025. We very much appreciate the conversation that we had on August 9th, the focused stakeholder engagement on these rules again. And I wanted to highlight, you'll see that we have, based on your feedback and a lot of additional information that you were able to share with us during the meeting, changed that to August 31 of 2026. So we're hoping that based on your feedback and the status of candidates, that this will give you the runway and candidates the opportunity to finish all of their requirements in a timely manner for certification under the rules that they began in. Jess, if you don't mind, one more time advancing me to the next slide. I think the clinical teaching component was another section where we enjoyed the opportunity to engage with you all in some very helpful conversations around ways in which to further be responsive to the feedback in particular that we had received about some of the challenges, quite frankly, with getting to the 490 hours of clinical teaching. There was a lot of feedback highlighted about university fall semesters and the transitions. And this is the section of rule text also where we had the opportunity to fold in the ability to use extracurricular activities and also address the professional development hours question. So I am hoping, I know that we had a lot of great feedback during the August 9th meeting. We took that feedback into consideration, and I hope through your review of the rule text that you received before the meeting, you see our efforts to sort of address those things, especially in 228.67B, the further delineation in B1 and 2 about trying to give greater flexibility about how to calculate the hours. And then in B2, the specific reference to the extracurricular activities and professional development. Jess,
I
I'm
think just to stamp here, right? Part of what I think folks, there was a confusion around what hours could count for the 490 hours. And so again, in our conversation earlier in August, really benefited from feedback from the group around the clarification of B1 and B2, which further specify, you know, all of the hours that can count towards those 490 within that B1, those specific hours that should happen in the context of the placement in the cooperating teacher's classroom. So really appreciate the feedback there on that clarification around what falls under that broader 490 hour bucket.
Thanks, Jess. On the very next slide, I wanted to share the question I mentioned and foreshadowed about clarification about the implementation date rules. So I want to give y'all basically the clarification here, and I think it gets at your individuals who maybe were in progress and working on requirements pre-9/1/2024, but also that requirement about the formal observations that is referenced in B. So I want to give you a few minutes to see the question, and then obviously you're going to see the big blue box is the answer to that particular question. And I'm not going to be overly dramatic here like the Oscars because we have quite a bit of material to try to get you all through. But basically the conversation and the question about, so beginning 9/1 of 2024, if you have candidates in your program who had not began the clinical experience, the formal observations aspect of that, those individuals need to meet the requirements in Big A. And so basically the formal observations need to align with the frequency and the duration requirements in New 228. And we made efforts definitely to communicate this often and frequently with the field throughout the rulemaking process. And so the rationale for this is the provisions in that 228.61A align with the things that we are measuring in ACEP. Now, the question that came in, which was an excellent question, was, does this also apply to the informal observations in the timeline? So we wanted to make sure that we clarified with this group, and I think this is an opportunity to continue clarifying with others, that the timeline in subsection A is specific to the formal observations. But if you have candidates who you admitted prior to September the 1st, 2024, the informal observations, you could choose to allow your candidates to finish out under Legacy 228, and the new informal observations in 228 would not apply to those candidates. So you have some choice there. And so I hope that clarification helped somewhat. And then I hope that seeing this on the screen and hopefully my articulation of this didn't further confuse the matter. And I'm going to pause here for just a few minutes, and then I think we're going to transition on. You all
Marilyn,
know.
I see Liz's hand is raised. Liz, do you have a
Okay.
question on this?
Yeah, so I just want to be clear. I mean,
Yep.
I think this is implied in the blue box, but I just want to be clear. So my clinical teacher started in August. So even though we already do 4 observations, and that's not a change for us, they technically only have to have 3, because when I create their clinical experience record, it's going to show that they started before 9/1/24. Is that correct?
So formal observations for after 9/1/2024 for all candidates, those admitted pre-9/1 and those post-9/1, everyone needs to move to the new 228 formal observation requirement. That's what A says. And that was, we've communicated that kind of throughout the rulemaking timeline, that for the purposes of 24-25-26 ASAP, it'd be a look back at 24-25 and would be implementing the new requirements.
Okay.
Where there is the difference point, kind of like the different paths that you can take, is related to the informal observations. So if a candidate was admitted pre 9/1/2024, and you chose to have that candidate be completed out under Legacy 228, that candidate would not be required to have the informal observations.
Okay. Do you see, maybe I'm the only one seeing it, but to me, the text in the blue box, I was understanding that from our last meeting. But when I say read the sentence that says, that means when we are evaluating the clinical experiences with a start date of 9/1/24 or after.
Liz,
So,
I realize I just misspoke to you. Yeah, no,
okay.
your candidates started their clinical experience pre 9/1/2024.
Yes.
No, then you're correct. So anyone
Okay.
who
I want to
began,
make absolutely
yes,
sure.
yes,
Okay. All right.
yeah.
Okay.
So
Thank
any
you.
clinical experience that starts after 9/1/2024, new observation requirements apply for this
Gotcha.
upcoming
Okay.
year.
I just wanted to make sure, because
No, thank you.
my understanding is kind of shifted. So I just wanted to make sure I was reading this
No,
correctly.
it makes me think, Liz, that like in our updated version of our FAQ guidance, that some sort of nice chart or flow chart would likely be helpful to make sure that everyone's crystal clear on these requirements. So I appreciate that. Zach, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just, I think I'm correct. Just again, to double check of what Liz was saying, we have an individual who started the school year mid-August under a probationary certificate, having passed both content and PPR. They can do 3 observations as opposed to the 5, correct?
Because their clinical experience has
Already
started pre
Correct. The clinical
9/1.
experience started at the beginning of the school year, mid-August.
Yes.
So
That Yes, but I know that Mark is on the line as well. Mark, is there any other clarification or, because I know this has implications with the ASAP rule, so just want to make sure that we're all clear.
Sorry that my background is only blurred. So yeah, that's the idea, is that we needed a hard, clear line here. So 9/1 is the hard, clear line. Since we do now collect the begin date of the clinical experience, both for interns using the intern certificate and also for clinical experience, for clinical teachers utilizing the clinical experience record, we can now clearly see the specific start date for everybody's clinical experience. If that specific start date for that clinical experience is before 9/1, you can adhere at a minimum to the rules in Legacy 228 regarding the frequency and duration of observations. If that clinical experience start date is 9/1 or after, the frequency and duration of formal observation rules, we're going to be looking for new 228 when we go back and do ASAP. You'll note in all of those provisions that are lined up in capital A there, that is not the provisions about informal observations. Those are not included in what we're specifically calling out here. Practically, right, this is the difference for your probationary candidates.
Yep.
So if you've got somebody on a PRO who is completing an internship, if that starts prior to 9/1, you can do the old count. If it starts after 9/1, it needs to be the new count.
That's really helpful. Appreciate the clarity. One other question while I'm unmuted, and I'm sure this has been thought about, but when we do ASAP reporting next year, or I guess for this current school year, the 24 to 25, there will be a delineation of how we're uploading ASAP data for observations and everything.
It won't change how you upload. It will change what we're doing in the back end. So since
Okay.
we have a clear start time, or a clear start date, we're going to be able to say, okay, the ones who started prior to 9/1, here's the set of minimum counts that we're looking for.
Got
For
it.
the ones that started after 9/1, here's the minimum counts that we'll be looking for, but it should not impact your experience entering data into ASAP.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate that.
Holly?
So just tell me how all this relates to the date change in the rules. Or does it?
To then, you're saying the date change that was the August 31, 2026. So for essentially what this, it doesn't explicitly relate. So, well, kind of. A candidate who was admitted pre 9/1, 2024, needs, and if they're completing all of their requirements under Legacy 228, they need to complete those requirements by August 31, 2026. So that's the specification where these timelines overlap some, right? We're talking about candidates who were admitted for the purposes of these formal observations. We're talking about candidates who were admitted pre 9/1, 2024, who are also beginning their clinical experience pre 9/1, 2024. Those candidates are probably, likely done with their requirements, by August 31, 2025, if they're already beginning their clinical experience, right? So those candidates are probably well ahead of this overall deadline. What this is allowing is for, let's say, someone who was admitted into a program this summer, and might be entering into an internship for this upcoming academic year. They could potentially complete all their requirements by 8/31/2025, but let's say they were a late hire, they started their internship in October and it didn't complete till the following October. It's just giving some runway for instances of certain types of candidates who are enrolled closer to that 9/1/2024 timeline. So that they're kind of two different sets of timelines here. Hence why I think a flow chart or some sort of chart would be really helpful for the field.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I'll name that, these were all implementation expectations that were understood in the field, but we got a lot of questions about them, just given, again, all the different nuances here. Hence the push to lock this in so that there's clarity for everyone, and real transparency in the rules.
I think that I've done my job to make sure the group was awake and ready to converse during this part of the meeting. I'm going to mute now.
I think, Liz, you got one more question?
Yeah, so I know that we're scheduled to propose in September, approve in December, ratify by SBOE and publish in the register sometime early February. So I think an important question for the field is, when does the more flexible clinical teaching start? Do we have to wait until next fall? Or, my clinical teachers are going to go back in January. Am I going to have to count the 490 in very strict terms in the beginning part, and then have more flexibility? I mean, I think that's a real important question that needs to be answered for the field, because the hours, as we've discovered, are not as flexible as they were intended to be. And so how does that impact our spring people?
That's really great feedback for us, Liz. I think, we will, and that's part of staff's intention to move these rules on the timeline that we've moved them on. And so trying to, I think we heard clearly from the aspect support for making changes around these types of flexibilities. And so we hope we're able to move efficiently through the process. What I'll name is that for the purposes of continuing approval reviews, right? So kind of those look back opportunities or the accountability relative to implementation of these new rules, kind of named how they show up in ASAP. For continuing approval reviews, we'll be looking for implementation of the new rules during the 26-27 continuing approval reviews, looking back at 25-26 cohorts and onward, recognizing that in these like limbo period, we've got candidates that are kind of either shifting from legacy 228 to new, this kind of updates to the rules. But I think that could also probably benefit us from some additional guidance around, as the SBEC makes action on these, we recognize there'll be a transition to further account for these flexibilities, et cetera. So that's some guidance that we'll make sure that we make clear to the field.
And Jessica, can you repeat the date again? So the year that you'll be looking for implementation of the new rules for purposes of the CAR is 26, 27, is that what you said?
So the 26-27 is when we'll be looking for implementation of the new rules. But we always do a look back, right? So that we'd be looking at candidates in the 25-26 academic year. So this upcoming academic year, the 24-25 academic year, we recognize as kind of this transition period for programs. And so the first cohort of candidates that we're going to look at for full implementation of the new rules will be the 25-26 academic year cohort.
So what will the 24-25 data report look at? I mean, are you looking for, can you just explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we'll be looking for implementation of legacy of like previous 228 for those candidates who are being completed out under legacy 228 and in previous years, right? Because we're looking back up to 5 years. So I think it will provide more guidance on that as well, Zach, as we kind of like make further plans. But essentially we've articulated to the board and stakeholders that, the first time that we're really reviewing for implementation of the new rules is that 25-26 academic year cohort.
Gotcha. Yeah. And the more, I think Mark will be doing a great job with this, the more lead time we have in terms of how we're reporting data and what we're collecting so that we can get it uploaded appropriately. I mean, we want to, make it as seamless as possible, but I appreciate just the thoughtfulness that this 24-25 is going to be a mixed bag of all sort of different things.
Right. And I would just definitely just name though that for Mark and the purposes of data reporting for ASAP, right? Like that's where we've got those clear transition point with the formal observation.
Right.
Really what I'm referencing is more in terms of the continuing approval review process.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Anything else on this front? I just want to echo Marilyn's thanks to everyone who rolled up their sleeves and responded on really quick timelines to provide us feedback. I think it's been really helpful, and hopefully the changes are responsive to the concerns we heard in the field. I'm going to transition it over to DeMarco.
Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Before jumping into the update on the Chapter 231 discussion item, I want to give a huge shout out to our EPSG Special Populations Working Group. So that's Trisha, Holly, Jamil, and Christina. We just truly appreciate your collaborative spirit and your willingness to read through multiple drafts and provide the necessary feedback to get this right for the field. So in the next slide, Jess, as many will recall, the updates to the board's Chapter 231 special education personnel assignments are really the result of a need to provide added clarity to the field, especially as it relates to the assignment of a special education teacher. During the July meeting, staff provided updated recommendations around content competency requirements at the elementary and secondary levels for those special educators. Staff also provided a draft of the worksheet that will potentially replace the current House worksheet. And then following the SBAC discussion and stakeholder feedback during that meeting, the SBAC directed staff essentially to move forward with content competency requirements for special education teachers of record only, and also share guidance to pursue elementary flexibility via the draft of that Texas content competency worksheet. At this upcoming September meeting, again, this is returning as a discussion item, but we do plan to put forward updated draft rule text that reflects SBAC and stakeholder feedback, in addition to providing an updated draft of the Texas competency requirement worksheet that also reflects board and stakeholder feedback and includes that elementary flexibility, excuse me. We do plan to share updates to the draft rule text and an updated draft of that worksheet with our EPSG Special Populations Working Group in the next week, so that you'll have a chance to see some of the updates we've made to that document since our last conversation. But again, we just appreciate the collaborative spirit with this work and look forward to having additional conversations around this topic as well. This is also a shameless plug for folks who are interested in joining that special populations working group and would like to provide some additional feedback around the work here. Please don't hesitate to send an email. We can also follow up with folks so that you're able to connect with us and attend one of those meetings. And I think that's it from me, Jess.
Great. Any questions for DeMarco?
I'll just say, as a member of the work group, I've really appreciated staff's responsiveness to input, and there have been a lot of versions and each one is better than the last. So just appreciate the work that's been done and the openness and willingness to hear feedback.
Thanks, Holly. No, it's been a great collaborative process. Alrighty, well then in the interest of time, I'll move us on to the next topic. Over to Beth.
Hey everyone, good to see you. I'll be talking about the next two items still in the spirit of keep doing this until we get it right and keep listening to stakeholders. So we are going to be presenting to the board an update on the development of the Texas Teacher Performance Assessment. So you can go to the next slide. So if you all remember, back in April, we got directive from the board to pursue development of the performance assessment in such a structure as we would be having Texas EPPs working alongside our TCEP vendor to develop this. This takes advantage of the relative strengths of each organization. So the EPPs will be able to provide their research backing, their knowledge of the context of the state, Texas classrooms, Texas programs, and the vendor is going to be set up to do a lot more of the test development and project management part of this. That was really a bit too much for any one EPP to take on their own. So how we see this going is that we will have a group of EPP content developers. They will be using their expertise to develop the assessment content. So thinking about the tasks, the writing prompts, the evidence that's going to be required for student work and for the teacher demonstration, adhering to these parameters set by the TEA. They will advise on content for support materials for districts and for candidates, and they'll be providing regular updates to the board. The vendor, meanwhile, will be doing the project planning. They will be bringing together this group of EPP content developers. They will be making sure that the assessment is valid, reliable, legally defensible. They will be field testing the exam and then preparing it for that introductory period. And then, as they were planning to do in either situation, they'll manage the administration and scoring of the exam. So the next slide goes into where we've been so far, what we're currently doing, and a draft of where we intend to go over the next few years with this. So right now, this month of August, we've been engaging with a lot of stakeholder calls. reaching out to EPPs, really trying to hear from them and see how we can get this right and set up a structure where we can get EPPs, but also a diversity of EPPs from across the state. So thinking about type of program as well as geographic location. Starting in October, we're going, after we update the SBEC in September, beginning in October, we're going to launch an application that will select EPP developers to work on this assessment. And then January, February, somewhere in this quarter, we'll be notifying the EPPs who are developing the content. We'll get them trained and ready to do this, and then begin the development of the assessment. So this is a draft timeline. This is going to be continued to be informed by the stakeholder feedback we're receiving this month and into the next week. So September, we're going to take all the feedback that we've heard from programs, and we're going to bring that to the SBEC September 20th. We're also going to have a more fleshed out proposal for them so they can give us feedback on, does this look right? Is there's anything else we need to adjust based on their feedback as we go forward with this. So yes, Holly.
Can you go back to the, you don't have to go back, but what was the end there? What, okay, so the end, no, the timeline, I'm sorry. I thought there was, okay, so you didn't have anything about implementation date on there, right?
No, the plan for the implementation date is going to be an introductory period in 2027, so September 2027, and that was presented to the board in July. We'll have a 2-year introductory period where a completed portfolio is going to count as a pass. And prior to that being launched, there will be some field testing as well.
Other questions for Beth?
Just a quick one. On the previous slide, it said SSA. Maybe I missed what that acronym stood for.
Thanks, Liz. Shared service agreement. So one thing we've heard from especially our smaller EPPs is that's still a lot of work for small EPPs to engage in. So what if they were given the chance to come together and form a group of small programs together, just programs from a single region to help work on this assessment?
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Good question.
Okay. Iterative process, trying to get it right, getting stakeholder feedback. We're bringing it back to the educator standards. So this is a process in which we've really enjoyed the feedback that we've heard both from the group that developed these standards over the past year, as well as the stakeholders we've heard from since the first discussion of these in April. A few reminders about the teacher pedagogy standards. These are our certification standards. And we've made some key shifts, one of which is that we are aligning them with the standards in 149, which are the standards for practicing teachers. So the idea is to have a single unified set of standards that teachers can use throughout their careers to continue to develop and improve. You can see in this diagram that the structure's been reorganized. This has been discussed at both the board meetings and the work session in July. Additionally, we've added content-specific standards for language arts and reading, and then math. And then the 3 big pieces that are aligned to the legislation. One is that the practices for educating all students are embedded throughout the standards. Additionally, so are practices in digital literacy. And then knowledge and skills aligned with the implementation of the OER instructional materials. So you'll see specific callouts to that. Where we've been over the past year, just to ground us in this, about a year ago, the SBEC approved membership to our development committee. So this were the 45 individuals from across the state who helped inform these standards. This committee worked tirelessly between November and March to develop, revise, provide feedback on the standards. And then we brought them to SBEC in April for our initial discussion, and then updated them based on stakeholder feedback. By and large, the field didn't have a whole lot of feedback, except with the piece where we're trying to implement the use of OER materials. We received a lot of feedback that initial lesson design is an essential skill that needs to be a part of these standards. A big reason being is that not every teacher has access to OER materials for their grade level and for their subject area. So we heard that. We brought in lesson design to the standards back in July and presented those. We still heard a few things that needed our attention, so the decision was made to bring them back in September for another discussion. So the changes that you'll see coming up in September, there will be specific callouts to knowledge and skills related to initial lesson design. There was a call to clarify and define some of the concepts. So these standards include a glossary, not a full dictionary of terms, but we did add some terms to this to further clarify them. And then provide clarity on how and when teachers engage in initial lesson design and how and when teachers engage in the use of the OER materials. So these will be presented to the board in September for a next discussion. And that's all I have today. Any questions on these? Holly?
Thanks, Beth. Maybe you don't know this, but so the idea is to have one set of standards for pre and post-service teachers. And so I know that the Chapter 149 standards are commissioner rules, different division, but are we certain that will those remain in place? Will those go away? Can you speak to what will happen to those standards?
Oh, go ahead, Jess.
That's a great question, Holly. So what we've framed for the standards committees and like the kind of the redesign of the standards from the beginning is that we were thinking about these standards both in the context of pre-service educators and in-service educators, so kind of engaged in this stakeholder process from our team and the team that owns the 149 standards. From a rulemaking timeline perspective, right, we are moving forward these Chapter 235 standards, getting the benefit of public comment, feedback from stakeholders, et cetera. And I can't speak to exact timelines for that team, but there is the intention that the 149 standards would also go through commissioner rulemaking processes to codify the changes that are reflected in the 235 standards. So there would need to be commissioner rulemaking clearly to make that happen, but there is a plan for that to happen, likely in a staggered approach with the 235 standards.
So you're saying the Chapter 149 standards would continue to exist. They would just be updated to reflect what's in 235?
So that they would need to go through their own independent rulemaking, but we would use the same foundation of the same standards. So the standards that we're considering in 235, right, as we've continued to iterate on them, as we get towards a more final version of those standards, we would anticipate that final version of those standards would go through Chapter 149 rulemaking to codify them as updates for in-service educators as well. There might be, though, but I'll say in full transparency, as those standards go through their rulemaking process, they may receive public comment, et cetera, right? That leads to some slight changes to the standards. But the intent was in the development process that we were moving towards a more aligned and more unified set of standards.
So would T-test continue to be based on the Chapter 149 standards then, as opposed to the 235, or how?
So T-test is aligned to the 149 standards. T-test is not mapped at all to the 235 standards. It's mapped to 149. To be really transparent, part of the benefit of having that alignment is that, there's sort of that coherence across the system. But so can't speak to any, but so essentially T-test would be connected to 149 and there would need to be 149 rulemaking.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Hey, Liz.
Yeah, so Holly's question kind of piggybacked into what I was thinking about. So then in the event that the 149 lines up with 235, then eventually there'd be changes to the T-test instrument. And then I would presume also changes to the principal and teacher evaluation ACEP indicators. So are you thinking, and I know I'm thinking that's pretty far down the field, but you know, since programs are held accountable on that and then making decisions based on that data, as soon as there could be a timeline kind of thinking about that, I think that would be helpful.
That's great feedback, Liz, and actually something we've already started kind of having on our minds. So that's definitely something that we're thinking about in the shift of these standards. Absolutely.
Can you say more about the third point here, providing clarity on how and when OER is used, just with the understanding that it won't, you know, necessarily be something that every teacher has access to? I'm just curious if you could say a little more about the language that you anticipate coming out of that.
Yeah, Carrie, you'll see that in the standards. And what we tried to do is be very clear about if a teacher has access to OER materials, you know, in their grade level and their content area, that should be the resource that they're using. And so I think that's where we tried to be clear in each of the standards and specifically call that out, recognizing that not everyone has access to those for their grade level or content.
And I think, well, so another kind of like layer that I would add on to that is that we also, because I think we got some feedback on this, is that we've clarified in the standards that, you know, your district has selected materials. If your district has selected materials, use the materials that your district has selected. If your district, but that, and then signaling that if those are the OER materials that a teacher in that grade level and subject area, that they should be, you know, using those as sort of their first step in their lesson preparation process. And then for those districts where they might not have access to high quality instructional materials, educators knowing that they have access to open education resources that are high quality instructional materials.
Okay, thank you. That clarifies. Thanks.
I'm not sure it does for me. Okay. So when you say has access to, you're trying to kind of define that a little more by saying what we mean by that is that your district has adopted those materials. Is that correct? When you say has access to?
Yeah, so if your district has adopted high quality instructional materials, right? So be it the OER materials or other materials approved by the SBE, right? Start with those strong materials in your lesson preparation process. And then, you know, we also have additional standards that say customize those based upon the needs of your students, et cetera. But then the guidance being, and we sort of, it's hard to, there's a difference between like guidance and like standards. So the extent to which this shows up in the standards, but to say if your district has not adopted high quality instructional materials and, you know, maybe asking an educator to engage in an initial lesson design, that they can begin with those open access open access materials in their preparation process versus needing to only start with lesson design from scratch.
So it's permit, like
it's permissive,
they can begin with.
So right, so we're trying to just describe the different circumstances, right? Which is tricky, but I think it's hard to describe a little bit, but we're happy to we're happy to share, you know, as soon as the language is posted. If y'all have additional questions and want to like talk through it with us, just reach out to us and we're happy to meet and chat before the meeting too. Just let us know. We can set something up if that works too, so we can kind of look through the language together.
Yeah, that'd be great, because I do think there is a current standard that I know we've commented on that made it, and this may be what you're talking about, this particular standard that talked about using OER materials when available. And then if not available, then you can use this other stuff. I don't know if that's the particular standard you're talking about, but the when available was kind of squishy because, you know, because does that mean your district's adopted them, or you're just saying anytime they're available, you know, so.
Yeah,
Because
so
given the definition of OER, they're technically always available to everyone, right? So there, I do appreciate that. I look forward to seeing the language around there being
Yeah.
clarification around district adoption or,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay.
awesome. No,
Thank
we'd really appreciate y'all's feedback. So yeah, if you take a look and then let us know if you want to chat about them, we'd greatly appreciate it. Turn over to Ebony. All right, y'all, this is me. Apologies, I've been trying to do vocal rest, but it is football season in Texas. So I have lost my voice. Hopefully it'll be back by the next EPSG meeting. So I'll make sure I do a better job of managing my screaming before I have to present. But I am really excited to have the opportunity to talk to you all today about some of our updates to EPF, in particular, looking at the redesign of our continuing approval process. Okay, so on the screen, you have a snapshot of our effective preparation framework. Just as a reminder, this was years in the making, really being able to clinch in on the expertise of the field. So this is a for the field, by the field, with the field design, as we look at that aspirational framework of what does high quality preparation truly look like. There's also a QR code. So this is the fun time where you get to take out your phones. And if you want to do the QR code, it will take you to our EPF website that walks a little bit more in depth over the overarching idea behind the EPF, all of the levers, including those key practices and essential actions that will allow programs to be successful as we work towards that continuous improvement. This is truly the anchoring document that we have, and the reason behind some of our redesign work. Some of you may remember that earlier this year, ASPEC has given us some directives on how we take the EPF and we really operationalize it. And we're doing this in a couple of manners. The first is looking at that redesign of the continuing approval process, where we're able to streamline those compliance areas, as well as be able to find ways to provide substantive feedback to our EPPs. So being able to look at what's happening under the hood of the car of your program, as well as being able to provide that feedback that's going to continue to allow you to grow in different areas and be able to stamp and recognize the areas where you're already going above and beyond, and you have that high quality instruction that's happening there. I'm happy to announce that our contracted work for the redesign has begun. We are partnering with TPI US to make a Texas specific review process that again is going to streamline those areas of compliance along with being able to provide that feedback that's needed for that continuous improvement. The second part of this is also working to put together a third-party technical assistance and professional service providers. So again, the idea behind it is as you get this feedback from your review, you're then also able to partner with technical assistants that will be able to help you plan out these strategic action plans in order to move towards growth and continuous improvement as well. And then Jessica, next slide when ready. And so just wanted to highlight some of our key priorities as we look at the redesign. That first box in yellow, again, you'll continue to hear the integration of quality review components that are aligned to those EPF levers, as well as streamlining that compliance components. So this is not in addition to, it's really looking at a way of being able to provide you all with that feedback in a manner that's reasonable. So we want to make sure that we are truly integrating this idea of continuous improvement alongside compliance. So for example, when we look at the review of quality of observation and practices, being able to see what's happening, being able to really triangulate different points by sitting in classrooms, seeing really your implementation in action to be able to give you that quality feedback. That second bucket is looking at the development and refinement of the CAR rubric and the processes through our pilots and additional stakeholder feedback. just like the EPF. We will be looking for stakeholder engagement from the start of the project, where we're looking at that criteria, the redesign, the building of the rubric, all the way through the end of our pilot 2.0, to be able to get feedback from the field, be able to make those changes that are needed, knowing that you all are quote unquote boots on the ground, and doing things in action and being able to receive your feedback and then design a process that works for you all, that works with you all, in order to truly move towards continuous improvement. And just a little bit, we'll talk about some of those opportunities that we'll be able to bring to both the EPSG and the EPSG working groups in order to receive the feedback on this process as well. And then finally, the third bucket is looking at that recruitment and training of Texas reviewers. I'm going to say I'm a little biased towards Texas. I definitely think that we are the greatest state, and we have some strong practices. And so it's really important for us not only to have expertise in content area and working with ed prep programs, but also being able to bring people on board that are well aware of our unique needs and the nuances that we have here in the state. And so to be able to recruit and train alongside our TPI US reviewers, to be able to have a Texas focus as we go through these review processes as well. Next slide. Perfect. So what does this look like? So the redesign is going to happen in 4 phases. And again, in each of these phases, there will be opportunities for us to gain stakeholder feedback. So the first phase, which we are in now, is looking at this framework and the rubric development. So there will be opportunities for you all this fall, so really within the next couple of months in September and October, especially, as we start building out what this rubric will look like, to provide feedback via survey, via focus groups, and we will be communicating out what that looks like and when those opportunities arise for you all to be able to see this information and then provide us with input there. The second phase, again, is looking at bringing Texas reviewers on board via recruitment, training, and selection. And what this will look like is having reviewers be able to do ride-alongs during our pilot 1.0 so that they see what that process really looks like in an authentic setting, and then being able to have a cohort of Texas reviewers that are ready to go once we move into full-scale operations. The third phase is looking at our pilot 1.0, which we are starting with this coming spring. So starting in January of 2025 with 5 of our programs, as well as then being able to bring 10 programs on board our 2025-2026 school year. And again, with our pilot programs being very intentional and making sure that we have representation from all types of prep programs, knowing that we've got a diverse group, we want to make sure that this process really works for our smallest of small programs to our largest of large, whether if you are an IHE, an ACP, an ESC, all of the other letters that we bring into this conversation, so that we really do get a feel for what does this look like in every space. And then finally, phase 4 is where we move into full-scale implementation, meaning that this would become a requirement for programs as they go through their 5-year review process. And again, all phases will have time to pause, talk through what this looks like, being able to roll up trends that we're seeing, any hotspots that we're seeing, to be able to get that stakeholder engagement and feedback, because this is truly for the field and by the field as well. I think it might be a duplicative slide.
Oh no, I was just any questions for Ebony around the continuing approval review redesign process? We'll be sending out comms around stakeholder engagement opportunities here really shortly, but just wanted to make sure we shared this update with the SBEC during their July work session. So wanted to make sure that this was on y'all's radar too, that we've been making good progress on this design process. Great. Well, appreciate Ebony that update, and I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn.
I am just giddy gleeful to be the one that is closing out the conversation today and have an opportunity to lead a follow-up conversation on the EPSG stakeholder experience. I hope that you all have also today felt the significant amount of appreciation and respect that we have for the experiences that we have had and continue to have with all of you all. This slide's an attempt to capture a lot of work that's already been done specific to this particular topic on the experience with stakeholders, and in the spirit of continuous improvement, ways that we can keep making that better for all of us involved. Y'all will remember we had the last June 21st EPSG meeting, and after that, I gave you a little bit of homework with the stakeholder survey to get your thoughts and feedback on the experience and how it's been for you to date. Gave you an opportunity to give some feedback for TEA staff to consider, and we were able to share your comments, direct comments with the SBEC board and engage in a conversation with the board at the July 18th, PM work session. The board got to see your comments verbatim, unedited, and we were pleased to get their reactions to your feedback and their directives to us when we come back to talk to this again, to continue the conversation of ways that we can continue to improve in this work as a collaboration. I think the note that I added at the bottom of the slide, it is an important conversation, and it's an amazing opportunity moving forward for us to continue ways in which we can collaborate and work together for the greater good. Jess is going to do the thing that she does so well, is to gently move me along so I'm not long-winded here, and I appreciate that greatly. She is smooth as silk with that. So as mentioned a few moments ago, we sent a survey out to you fine folks and gave you a response period, I think, of June 21st rather, through July the 2nd. We got 12 responses back, filled with a great deal of helpful feedback on direct comments and guidance on ways that you felt about the stakeholder experience to date and opportunities for us to improve on that. Based on your feedback, we were able to bucket the comments, if you will, into three what we would call broader categories about updating the participant list, as you'll see here, improving the meeting experience for all involved, and then increasing the visibility about your voices in conversations and what you've actually said, and making sure that we are being transparent in that conversation. Also, I'm going to give you a few minutes here because then I'm going to break this down again. So these were the things we summarized and provided to the board that were reflective of your direct feedback to the survey. Points very well taken in the recommendations for consideration about the stakeholder group and the voices at the table and expanding that. Definitely a nod to the importance of the partnership with our associations like TCASE and CTAT and TMEA. Grateful beyond measure for the ability to work with them whenever needed, but bringing them more closely into the conversations on a regular basis. In the middle, with the improved meeting experience, heard very clear feedback about locking in dates, and being able for you to plan, but for you to also have the space and the time to go back and work with your partners from your respective organizations to make sure that you're able to give your best thoughts and feedback to us. Under the visibility, the webpage. Always opportunities to improve with the technology, and making sure also that there's a clear place where we name the participants and what we've done in those things. So we very much appreciated that feedback. Quickly on the next slide then, based on that conversation in the afternoon session, came back and then took the board members' reflections. And so this slide here is an attempt to they gave a lot of wonderful feedback during the conversation, but in each of the three buckets of feedback there, things that the board were able to share with our particular team in ways to address that feedback that we'd received on the survey. So everyone was in agreement about, clear processes when we have folks who will transition off, the ability to have and make sure that your professional organizations have a voice that is available. I am looking at the chat over here too, and then getting caught up in the chat. So I need to stay focused on the slides here. The meeting experience, a couple of things, meeting norms, making sure that we make sure everybody's got some time to share their concerns. Also, when appropriate and possible, opportunities for board members to listen in on some of the meetings, and then making sure we have a regular cadence of meetings. And on the visibility side, we got feedback from board members if we're going to make a reference to stakeholders and what they said, to be more transparent in who exactly the stakeholders were. And then also key points from previous meetings, making sure that we're keeping a running tally. So everyone, if you missed a meeting before, it's easy for you to catch up and understand what the conversations were from the last time. Jess, if we, I'll pause for a few more seconds here because I didn't want folks to feel like Marilyn ran through these, but here's my foreshadowing. Post work, you are going to have an opportunity to have some quality time with a lot of this information, as I'm going to indulge on your creativity and tap your fountains of wisdom for some post work following this meeting, that we can continue this conversation. With that said, Jess, I think I've got my first slide where there's an opportunity for me to be quiet for a minute and let you super talented and wise folks maybe share some initial reactions. So a couple of things. We want Holly, go right ahead.
You weren't even done talking. I can wait till you're done.
Okay, no problem here. This first one was just an opportunity on updating the participant list. One of the things that we wanted to ask over here on your input, we are very much interested in renaming this group from EPSG to EPSI. And I think Jess had put a comment in the chat already, to reflect that this is a stakeholder group that's convened to talk on topics that are under the umbrella of every aspect of our department's work, the educator preparation, certification, and enforcement. The amazing Sarah Wolf's stakeholder meeting was a fine example of that, yet this morning in action, that we've got talent within this current group that can expand beyond just the educator preparation specific topics. With that in mind, and I see hands coming up, which makes me really happy, so that means I can be quiet. The last column for EPSG input, we are going to have a post survey that goes out, but if you all have any immediate reactions and thoughts about renaming, also just how we can refresh the list, and then also the additional organizations, we would love to hear your thoughts. Holly, I think I saw you first, lightning fast, so I'd say you probably go first, and then I do see Dr. Ford's hand as well.
Well, mine was about the previous slide. So if we're going to get to that, if you're going to get to that at some point, for example, under increased visibility, include key points from previous meetings, are we going to be talking about that coming up? If so, I'll wait till then.
Yep, we've got a slide of next steps for each one of these buckets.
Gotcha. Thank you.
It'll come up.
Okay, thanks.
Dr. Ward, your hand's going to drop off if I don't say your name in a minute, so go right ahead.
Thank you. So in terms of refreshing the current participation list or participant list, I believe there are teachers on the list. And so one thing that I think would be helpful is to have a process, either a nomination process or an application process. Am I correct in understanding that there are classroom teachers on the?
There are, in the context of, so right now, there are additional EPPs outside of those that are representative of professional organizations who attend. There are what we've called community members, but that includes teachers and then representatives from other organizations. And then we also have on here the recommendation to include some LEA representatives. Again, similar to how we have EPP is representative of professional organizations, but then other EPPs, can we do something similar on the LEA front as well? And so I think part of what we'll be asking y'all to provide input on is, the best ways for us to, seek to invite additional folks to engage in participation here.
Okay, yeah, I think just if there's a process,
Absolutely.
that would be helpful.
Right, because we have had a number of the folks who are on, who are the current EPP and community participants who've transitioned roles, et cetera. So similar to the professional organizations where that's occurred, we think there's an opportunity here to add additional participants and voices.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then I think the other thing here to just highlight in terms of sets of recommendations would be to kind of establish an annual process where we seek to refresh our kind of participant contact list to make sure that we've got the most up-to-date points of contact. One thing I would name, we got some good feedback around the organization participants from a given professional org that there have been times where the acting president of a given organization has been the one who's been the sort of most frequent participant in EPSG, but knowing that that's a kind of assignment in some professional orgs where that transitions annually, that got some good recommendations where, guidance to professional orgs that it doesn't necessarily need to be the presiding officer. It could be anyone in your professional org who wants to be a more frequent participation in this space. So just providing also some additional guidance to orgs when we do outreach around, here's some thoughts or considerations as you're providing input on participants.
I have a question. Do we, so the current EPSG list, and I think you were just speaking to this, Jessica, includes at-large members, I think they're referred to, comprised of EPPs and teachers, I think.
Yeah.
Can we recall why we had that to begin with, or what purpose that serves, or what do we intend to maintain that going forward?
And I think to be frank, I think part of what the challenge is with some of this is that those sort of formal structures were implemented when this body was a formal educator preparation advisory committee. And so with the transition from an advisory committee to a stakeholder group, knowing, conversation you all had a while back around kind of what the statutory requirements are related to advisory committees, right? That's part of some of the nuance where we had those at-large seats because there was this nomination process for professional orgs and then this like set of additional seats. With the pivot to a stakeholder group, right? We kept some of, we kept the like participant list that we were continuing to invite to these spaces, but I think we have an opportunity now to refresh and invite additional participants into the space who are from the EPP teacher perspective, LEA perspective, et cetera. Similar to how we were approaching things with that large seats, but not as formal as that anymore.
Because a lot of those folks have kind of dropped off.
Right. So I think it's a good opportunity for us to target, are there additional folks we want to make sure are, standing participants in these spaces?
Okay.
And, they could have transitioned roles, right? Same thing for some of our professional orgs. Someone transitioned off, they changed their career, and we never got a refreshed individual who we could benefit from their perspective. So it's kind of the goal of ensuring we've got an update and then an annual process to solicit voices.
Thanks, Jess. On this next one, same sort of thing here. Some initial reactions maybe about opportunities to improve the meeting experience overall. You'll see in the middle column, just did a great job on the previous slide of sort of highlighting. We are going to, in the post work, make sure that we survey you all about an effort to lock in 2025 meeting dates, and get those secured on calendars. Make sure, we're preparing to get you agendas and things to react to in time. And then also making sure that we have an opportunity to kind of poll this group about what are you interested in, key topics to think about for this next coming year. I will say, if I can take a moment here. So the bullet in the middle at the very top, that second bullet about a detailed agenda and supporting documents to allow time for review and reflection. We are going to do our darndest each time to do this with ample time, but I would be remiss if I didn't say sometimes there are going to be topics, and we did talk about this in the afternoon work session, where it may be that something needs to go to the board before it comes back to this group, and then vice versa. So, I would say charge it to our hearts here in some situations where we may need some flexibility with amount of time that you have to be able to review and react to things. But that is something we are going to be mindful of as you're having those opportunities, because everyone said, I want to be able to take this back and talk in more detail with my organization. Several of you on the survey gave the feedback, and thanked us for the time that you had in even putting your comments together for the stakeholder experience survey, as well as the 228 survey. And we could tell in the feedback and the reflections there how helpful it was for you to have that additional time to give us some really robust feedback. That was a benefit to everyone working on the rules. When you look at the last column there and think about 2025 meeting dates, and we get the joy of trying to think about meeting dates during a legislative session year. So how hot and happening are we going to be as we are getting together and helping each other thrive through the additional fun of a legislative session? But in all seriousness, just thinking about timelines, how much time, is sufficient time in your opinion, some of those kinds of things. And then that bottom half, do any of you have a burning desire to immediately share some thoughts about, I have been waiting for someone to open the door and ask me, could we think about these particular topics or things? I wanted to just pause for a second there and maybe ask a couple of those questions for consideration.
And when we're thinking about those focus topics for the upcoming calendar year, we're thinking about similar to the types of topics we've engaged in working groups this past year on. So special education, we've had working groups around the effective preparation framework, et cetera. So really thinking about, are there focus topics that the broader EPSG wants to engage in, or that we would want to have a more targeted and focused engagement around in kind of a maybe a more frequent cadence, or a like targeted period of time cadence, et cetera. I think Ebony's framing around the continuing approval review redesign is a great example of a type of focus topic that this group could engage in. But to Marilyn's point, any initial thoughts or reflections?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there would definitely be an appetite for collaboration with the Texas TPA development, especially given
Absolutely.
the new sort of structure of having the EPP. So I think having some sort of formalized relationship between that and us would be great and well received.
Yep, Carrie, we were thinking along those same lines as some draft topics for focus areas. So that's super helpful.
And a lot of these are, well, I don't know. I think I see many of these as being carryovers, right? This is work that's been ongoing.
Yeah.
So, in terms of identifying future topics, you guys are probably the best at that. It's just a matter of when you do identify them, I think some of the feedback was sharing.
Oh, Holly, I think we lost you right at the good part.
Now we can all play. Who can
Maybe,
predict?
involving stakeholders earlier, but I oops, let me shut off my video.
Sorry, Holly, we lost you right when you said sharing, and then we didn't know what came after that.
I turned off my video. Maybe that'll help. I'm just saying, I feel like I appreciate you asking us what other topics, and I think we will be able to think of those, but I also think you guys are kind of front and center at being able to see things bubble up. And I think a lot of the feedback from the EPSG group was letting us know about those earlier.
Yeah.
Letting us be involved earlier in shaping, the direction that goes. So the other thing I would say is you probably do this anyway, but to avoid too many meetings during the legislative session, if at all possible.
Yeah, or targeted. I think we know last session, most of the hearings were on Tuesdays and Thursdays, so those are probably not good days to schedule these. So we'll definitely keep all of that in mind as we're or planning. We're gonna ask y'all about that directly in the survey.
Thank you.
One thing I would just like name, and I think Marilyn alluded to this, is we've struggled in the past trying to find the sweet spot between do we meet earlier to like, do we meet before an SBEC meeting where like rule text might be, more formal and codified so we can gather reflections on kind of the most up-to-date or like refined thinking? Or do we meet right after an SBEC meeting where we've got the SBEC's fresh feedback on our mind, but there might not be, updates made to rules yet, but we want to have that conversation. So just to put that on y'all's, just have y'all thinking that way is like, from y'all's perspective, is there a better approach in terms of, we traditionally meet between two SBEC meetings? Would you rather meet on the earlier side, or, a little bit closer to the actual meeting date? But just a plug for people. That's been something that we've been grappling with on our end too, but just something to think about.
Jessica, in terms of when we meet in relation to SBEC, I think a contributing factor there may be what kind of information from EPSG or EPSI, and that's a later slide, will be shared with SBEC. And so if we meet afterwards, it's going to be kind of stale. I don't know. I'm just pointing out that that's maybe
it's a great point, right? And I think it might be dependent. It's a little tricky because it's kind of dependent upon where something is in the rulemaking process, right? Like I think if there's rules that, right, when we go to print, we then bring those rules to stakeholders and say, what additional feedback do you have? And so the SBEC has a version of the rules, and then we share additional feedback that we've gotten from stakeholders that then informs what the SBEC tells us to do with those rules. Next go around, right, is one approach. Or do we have draft rules early that benefit from stakeholder input that are then reflected and would shared with the board? I think there's kind of multiple ways to go about it, potentially dependent upon where something is in rulemaking. But I agree, Holly. I think that's something that we can kind of continue to talk through with y'all.
Boss lady, in the interest of time, do we go to my next slide for a hot happening second, and then I'm gonna whip up on them about post work. This one again, visibility. I think we've touched on this somewhat already and gotten a lot of great feedback. The website, as we're refreshing and expanding the list, the ability to be able to proudly share who our partners in this work are was one thing. And then also just to the point, norms, how we want to be in these meetings, bring ourselves, and then also Jess alluded to this very early, our ability to utilize your great thinking through the use of surveys and being able to transparently share that feedback with the board continues to be an important part of the process. Real quick, a couple of teasers, the EPSG input on the right-hand side. And Dr. Ward reads faster than I can ever speak. So I bet she's got some words of wisdom here to share with us. I'm gonna be quiet here. Go ahead, Dr. Ward.
Oh, I'm just like Holly. I was going to let you finish. I just have a couple thoughts here. So please finish out.
No, I'm good. It's more
Okay.
important for me to hear from you, Wise One. Absolutely.
Well, so I do feel that, there's levels of understanding across the field about what's going on between TEA, SBEC, and the field. And so, I know a number of colleagues that on the SBEC meeting days, they tune in. They may be at work, but they're following the meeting. They're asking questions. So I would hope that in similar to that, if we could set up the EPSI meetings where those of us who are invited to speak, it could be like a webinar, but that the field could watch, because the more our constituents, our organizational members know as this is coming down the pipeline, the better feedback we can give. And so it doesn't have to be kind of this, okay, we put in 228 and now we're going back and making these tweaks. I don't think people fully understand the process, and really EPSI is a place where we can put in that feedback sooner rather than later, and then having those reactions. So if we could do that, I think that would be huge.
Yeah, it makes me think on two things, Liz. I think there was a good conversation with the SBEC around like
folks who participate in this space the kind of like responsibility for bringing information back to their, like, if you're representative of a professional org, right, like bringing this information back to your professional organization as like a responsibility, and then also being able to like solicit input from your professional org and like bringing it to this space. So I think that you know, going back to the last slide, we were talking about timelines and making sure we're getting topics to you all in a timely manner, getting materials to y'all in a timely manner. So there's more of that two-way communication so that folks are aware, I think is a good reinforcer. And then making sure that we're planning on doing a better job of like posting those meetings to the website in a timely manner, and also wanting to put in timestamps so that folks, if there's a specific topic that folks want to see, like, hey, what's EPSG been discussing about this, they can easily navigate to where that lives in that recording. But I'm thinking about those two processes as being like complementary, if that sounds like it addresses what you're thinking about.
It does. And the other
Okay.
thing that I think would be helpful is, I know many times we're trying to take screenshots during the meetings. If the meeting slides for both SPEC meetings and these meetings could be posted, it makes it easier for the field to know exactly what was shared.
Yeah, no, that's good feedback. It's something we've kind of grappled with for a while, because I think oftentimes the challenge with slide design, right, is sometimes there's a lot of like narration over something that like actually hearing someone facilitate against it gives it that context. So there's always that like push and pull. But that's good feedback for us to hear too.
Okay, I think I put my note, I'm taking good notes and then looking at y'all and getting all starstruck. So we need to wrap this up because you folks are going, I want a cookie. It's time to
Marilyn,
stop.
I
Yes.
wonder, Holly, for good interest, I know you said at one point there was something that you were holding.
Oh, yes.
Is there,
Wasn't there one more slide somewhere?
this is the last one around, this is our
Oh.
last set of next step slides. So if you had another thought, wanted to give you a chance to name it.
Go back to the original, all of it, where you
Yep.
gave us all of it. Okay, now, right there. So under increased visibility, the last box, include key points from previous meetings and incorporate the use of minutes or other methods to ensure an ongoing record of conversation. When you're saying that, are you talking about for SPEC purposes?
No, so that was in the purpose. We got some feedback from stakeholders that like, can we include
okay.
meeting minutes, et cetera, for the EPSG meetings? And so that's where I think, frankly, minutes can sometimes be challenging because it requires kind of like interpretation of what folks said. And so we thought that like maybe a middle ground here was like prompt posting of the meeting recording with timestamps, so folks have a better ability to navigate through to the specific topic that they wanted to watch and observe. Was there a different approach or thought that you were thinking about, Holly?
No, I was focusing in the context of sort of, I know we've discussed in the past, and maybe this slide that's up there now kind of addresses it, but sort of this, there have been calls in the past for like a standing EPSG report to SBAC kind of thing in the agenda. And in this slide that's on there now, TA staff will more explicitly name in SBIC items which groups of stakeholders provided input on a policy. I remember they wanted more specifics about which stakeholders, when you refer to them, who you're talking about, and I support
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I guess I'm just wondering about sort of a more explicit mention of EPSI feedback in conjunction with particular agenda items.
So I think this is where we would say, like, and I think you can kind of see this reflected in recent items where we've tried to be more explicit around, these are the groups that we've engaged with to provide input on this given policy recommendation. Here's kind of what those groups shared. I do, though, also think there's opportunities for us to further refine that. I think we got good feedback from the SPEC that, you know, recognize in any stakeholder group, there's likely multiple perspectives. And so leveraging things like surveys where we can kind of share, here's all the sides of and perspectives from this stakeholder group on this given issue, I think has also been beneficial when we've been able to do that for the board. So those are kind of the recommendations that we're putting forward. In terms of more formal reporting from this stakeholder group, I think we are just very cautious about writing kind of the difference between a stakeholder group versus an advisory committee. And knowing that, there are certain functions that an advisory committee holds. And, if this group starts acting as an advisory committee in day-to-day functions, then, we are under the provisions of that statute. And so we're trying to ensure that we're being reflective of the feedback from this group, being explicit around when and where EPSG members have provided feedback on a given topic, but also trying to ride that line.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. But I do think with it isn't EPSG the main or the only standing committee compared to other stakeholder groups. And if that's the case, are you saying you have hesitancy in saying EPSG feedback was this and such because in order to really say that?
No, we
Okay.
we will absolutely say in the context of sharing, here's what stakeholder said. The EPSG stakeholder group said X, Y, and Z about this given topic. This group,
Okay.
we met with this group of LEAs, they provided this feedback on this topic, right? Like being clear around which stakeholders we've engaged with and the feedback that we've received from those stakeholders. We're absolutely, we will do that across stakeholder groups, including for this stakeholder group.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, boss lady, I'll do it quick, promise. We had some additional questions for reflection that we're going to send to you all in the post work. I think the big thing here, since I know we're over time, was I wanted to just give folks a heads up. I am not messing with your Labor Day holiday weekend. So you look for follow-up from our team the week of September 9th as post work with some more detailed opportunities for us to get feedback from you all about the continued conversation around stakeholder feedback, meetings, those sorts of things, and hoping that giving you until October the 4th to return that is ample time for you to talk with others, give some time for best thinking, and then also wanted to test the waters for a possible November 1st EPSG meeting. And until we find out maybe better days and times, that's a Friday again from 10 to 12 were the two thoughts. You don't have to answer me right on the spot now, but I did at least want to say that was sort of the next timeline and thinking, and we will follow all of this up in writing for you all to kind of react to. I was long-winded Baptist preacher today, but the one closing out, again, I would be remiss if I didn't say a huge thanks to all of you for your ongoing conversations with this. And I've been the one usually that has bugged you about, have you responded yet or done things? And you've been incredibly patient and gracious with me in particular on some of these things. And our entire team thanks you a whole lot. I'm gonna be quiet because my boss closes us out better than anyone else, but I wanted to say my special thanks to folks.
Oh, thanks, Marilyn. I know we're over time, y'all. If anyone had any additional questions, you're welcome to stay on and address them to staff. Staff can stick around and support as needed, but want to say thank you to everyone. I know everyone's kicked off or kicking off the academic year. So our thoughts are with y'all and excited to hear about the good work everyone's engaged in. So looking forward to seeing y'all in person or virtually over the course of the next few weeks. And y'all know where to find us if you've got any other feedback around any of the things we talked about today. Thanks, guys.
Hey, Marilyn.